So I'm Joe. I own 718 Cyclery. We just moved into this space 2 months ago. 2 months ago yesterday. I mean, January 1st we moved in from a much bigger, more stressful space that I was just describing earlier. The idea around the shop is to really focus on the things that I really found interesting about the bike industry, and that was going on trips, in classes and presentations and building up bikes, but the interaction with people as we went on trips. We did more and more of these trips every year, and the interaction you have with people that are out in the woods, in the rain, those kinds of interactions are just so much more special as a person that owns a business relative to someone that walks in and buys a helmet and leaves. So I really wanted to pursue the idea of building a business around those kinds of relationships and not necessarily I always tell the story of, like, if you work at Staples and you walk in and you buy printer ink, you don't care about the printer ink, the person that works at Staples doesn't care about the printer ink, like no one cares about any of this, and they just leave. Well, the idea around this shop and our previous shops too was kind of really caring about what we do. And the nice thing about this business is that everyone who walks in the door is interested in what I'm interested in. So we kind of share these kind of interests subconsciously already when people walk in the door. So that's the nice thing about the bike industry. So what I'm going to do is just talk tonight about some real basic, we'll go around the room real quick and see what kind of experience people have with this. But just talk about some of the basic terms, some of the basic bike types, some of the trip types. There's a lot of buzzwords. Talk about some planning tools and kind of some of the things that we go through when we kind of plan our trips. We do multiple trips a year. If you guys want to go on in micro tours, we can do 25% off. Just talk to me later about that. And we're doing a bunch of things this year. So going around in bike camping, touring experience?
Just day stuff and stuff like that, but now I've got more time. I'm looking to bike pack, 2-3 days type sort of stuff.
Oh, great.
Same. I don't have much more time, but I'm looking to do the same type of thing.
It's the white hair.
With him.
I've done day trips on my bike and camping separately, so I'm bringing together.
Yeah, we get a lot of that. Folks that have done both of these things that are trying to really put it together. We see that a lot.
I'm in the same camp. I've done long day trips and I've done multiple nights of camping, but not together.
I've done a little micro tour from Seattle to Portland, just like camping and warm showering along the way. Yeah, would love to do like a longer tour for sure.
About same as these ladies.
Okay.
Yeah, just done camping.
Just trying to take the next step.
Also, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I've done long bike trips, a couple multi-day ones, but I've never camped in any capacity.
Okay. So more like an in-to-in kind of thing?
Yeah, I believe.
Credit card touring?
Credit card touring. Yeah.
And then?
None.
Okay. You're in the right place though, right?
Yeah.
You come to the right place. Sure. So we'll talk about all those kinds of, there's a whole world of it out there. Bike touring is a real kind of small part of the bike industry, which is kind of a niche thing in the whole economy of this country. There is a magazine here called Adventure Cycling. If you guys haven't picked one up, they're free. Take one. There's like a 6-month membership. It's a really great organization. It's a really cool magazine. It really speaks to this kind of riding. Really no other magazine out there that I know of really focuses in that way. All right, so as we go through this, any questions, stop me. This is not like cut and dry. I love talking about this stuff. I love getting people interested and involved in this stuff. And it's attainable. That's what I always tell people. It's doable. You don't need a $4,000 bike and like an $800 tent. Like, you can do these things for sure. All right, so this is kind of a little bit of the outline. We'll talk about some bikes, some trip types, some ways to carry the stuff on your bike. Talk a little bit about gear, trip planning resources, and then some local trips that we've done and great ways to kind of get started if you want to kind of try to push. And you can camp in Brooklyn at Floyd Bench Field. It's 12 miles from here. You can kind of do these things. It's Brooklyn, and you really have to like suspend your disbelief a little bit in order to really camp. But are these lights too bright to see this? Because I can turn these down.
No, it's perfect.
Are these good? Okay, cool. So we'll talk about some of that stuff too. All right. So the first thing we'll do is talk about the bike, and we do a lot of micro tours, and those are leave on a Saturday, come back on a Sunday, and I've seen like the entire gamut of people and the bikes that they use to make it on these trips. And we've done 7 trips a year, 8 trips a year for 5 years, so we've done like 40, at least 30 or 40 of these trips, and other things too. So we've seen a lot. Usually on every trip, there's 1 or 2 people that's like, oh my God, this is not we can't take responsibility for their bikes necessarily. So, and I don't want to. And we always tell people to get your bike checked over before you, get it checked over, not by us, before you go on these trips. We're not responsible for what happens. We'll certainly help you out, and we've had all kinds of calamities mechanically on these trips. But there's always a few people that I'm like watching, kind of have my eye on these 2 or 3 bikes, like, man, I'm gonna stick with this person a little bit and just kind of stay with them and see. And everyone always amazes me. Like I'm all the trips we've done, the only person that never made it was me. I got sick on one and was with other people, and I had to drop out. I was the only person historically to ever not make it on one of our trips. So everyone makes it. I can't describe the things I've seen. I've seen like flip-flops on a fixed gear with a backpack for 60 miles up and back. And I think the guy didn't realize what kind of trip it was. And he wasn't like this super like messenger, like, he was just a normal person, and he did it, and he was perfectly fine. So, talking about bikes. So at the top of the food chain in the bike touring world.
You got
yeah,
you got that music.
It's a good video.
Yeah.
Yes, it's fun. I watch this. It's kind of on every day. This is like the 1974 Giro d'Italia or something like that. This is those hats, the Brooklyn hats that you always see people riding around to see their shirts there.
Sure.
There's a candy company in Italy called Brooklyn Chewing Gum Company, and that's what this is. It's like nothing about Brooklyn. It's about this company that happens to be called the Brooklyn Gum Company. So all these like cycling hats and stuff that you see around are all about that, and not really about Brooklyn. They kind of are. But, all right. Just, let's see how this goes. All right, so classic touring bike. This is the kind of bike that you ride across the country on. When people come in a lot and ask for touring bikes, and I really try to get a sense of what they mean by that, because people mean certain things when they say certain things about bikes, and I want to make sure that what I think a touring bike is and what they think a touring bike is the same thing, because I want to be able to communicate with them. So some of the features of a touring bike, and this guy up on the wall here is a good example, the green bike. The big thing is the range, right? And by the range, it's like how wide of a gear range, from the easiest pedaling to the hardest pedaling, how wide is that range? What's the easiest and what's the hardest? Because on a touring bike, you're going to need to be able to go up and down mountains, and the bike's going to be loaded and all those kinds of things. So what we generally look for is a triple chainring on the front, right? So there's 1, 2, 3 gears on the front. That's the first thing that you kind of start to look for. Another thing you start seeing a lot of is bar end shifters, right? And those are the shifters that are on the end of drop bars. So you see these kind of levers that come out the end of these, the end of the drop bars here. There's bar end shifters, they're called. And those are really useful for touring in that they're easy to repair, they're very reliable and durable, so you see them still show up on touring bikes, bar end shifters. For riding around the city, a little bit of a challenge, right? Because you're moving your hands all over the place to kind of shift and brake. And so when people come in and talk about touring bikes, I really want to make sure, like, is this going to be your only bike? Because you're going to go on this tour for 3% of this bike's life, and then you're going to come back and it's going to be your commuter for the next 12 years. You really want to make sure that you're going to have the bike that's going to be the right bike for you. So I always try to find out if this is really going to be a touring bike, and that's all it's going to do. Long wheelbase, right? So that means the wheels are further apart than on most other bike types, and it's hard to kind of perceive that when you're just looking at them. But a bike that has a longer wheelbase, and again, that means the wheels are further apart from each other, it's much more comfortable in a straight line, it's kind of like driving an RV, just very comfortable and relaxed, because comfort is very important. On a touring bike, you're going to be on that bike 40 or 50, 60 miles a day, if not more. So anything that's wrong with the bike or any kind of fit issues you have are going to be like magnified. Other things, the ability to mount racks on the bike. I mean, that's kind of a given on most bikes these days, but the ability to put a rack on the front and rear of the bike, relatively critical for carrying stuff on the bike. A couple different wheel sizes. You'll see 700s, you'll see 26-inch wheels, which are slightly smaller, but that's starting to fade away a little bit. And again, great for long distance and road tours. Next kind of bike you kind of start coming across is, and again, these are terms that you'll start seeing if you're looking for a bike or in the market, a light touring bike. And a light touring bike, really the big difference here is that it's a little sportier, a little more versatile for the person that's going on the tour and then coming back and needing to have a bike for a daily kind of commute. So sometimes this is a nice way to kind of split the difference. You're still going to do racks, and you're still going to do, the ability to put racks on it. You're going to start to see disc brakes, and again, I should have mentioned that previous, but disc brakes are kind of the way the world's going. They weren't on touring bikes for a long time. Touring bikes were always designed around the idea of the most reliable or the most ubiquitous stuff out there, right? So if you're in the middle of Mongolia and your bike breaks, there's a good chance you're going to find like rim brakes, and you're going to find a 26-inch wheel and not hydraulic disc brakes and all these crazy things. So touring bikes were always kind of designed around these very parts that were very easily available. But that's slowly starting to change. You've seen more and more touring bikes with disc brakes, more and more touring bikes with bigger 700 wheels. So a light touring bike, this is probably the most popular bike that we sell, bike type that we sell, because again, it does, the person that comes to buy a bike from us, we don't have a garage where we can put like 19 bikes in the garage. It's like my roommate says I can have one bike, so I got to have one bike that does everything. So you're looking for one bike that does a lot of things. And that's what we are always looking for too, bikes that can do a lot of things for folks, because we don't all have the budgets and the space for all these bikes that we need. Right, light touring bike, adventure bike. This is kind of a weird term, and it's a term that I'm not really sure what it actually means, but it starts to get into bigger tires. It starts to get into flat bars instead of drop bars. It starts to talk about potentially doing a trip on dirt roads, on multi-surface, with frame bags, and we'll get into that in a second too. But again, this is what's called an adventure bike. It's a little hard to really kind of really define. So there's things I use like mostly and probably and a lot of the times. Wheel size is you're gonna have a big tire, and again, it's kind of like a mountain bike without like the squishy front fork is the best way to describe an adventure bike. Gravel bike. This is another bike industry trying to like remarket like everything. Could you use a gravel bike on roads? Yeah, you can use a gravel bike on anything. Gravel bike and gravel riding is a big part of the industry right now. Every few years there's like something that's going to come along that's going to save the bike industry. Right now it's gravel bikes. There's a huge movement of people that ride road bikes and are kind of starting to get more and more fearful of riding in traffic and riding on roads where people might be distracted, and there's a lot of incidents that happen. So a lot of traditional roadies, and these are the guys that like men and women that like fly around the park and race up 9W all the time, are moving to these gravel situations where it's just a slower, less competitive, just more relaxed kind of mentality. So these bikes tend to make great bikes for commuting around the city also, because the streets here are pretty rough. But again, big tires, wide gear range. A lot of these terms are kind of, a lot of these bikes are kind of intermixed with each other. And the next one is any bike with a rack. Right, this is a classic that we see a lot on all the trips that we do. If you can just get a rack on your bike and you're comfortable with it, like you can get going and get started, right? This is a person who, not the greatest setup in the world, because all the weight's on the back, and the bike's gonna want to like tip over. But if that's what you got, that's what you got, and that's what she's got going on here: 2 panniers and a rack, and then in the middle of the rack, that green thing is like probably her tent. And it looks like she's carrying a backpack or something on her back. I forget this trip. This was a couple years ago, but she made it and she lived, so it worked. I guess she lived, right? I hope she did. All right, so now we're going to talk about different kinds of trips, different kinds of ways that you can have an adventure on your bike. What we do here generally is what's called self-supported. You also see the word unsupported, but I think that sounds really negative, like you're on your own. Self-supported sounds a little more like self-sufficient. So I use the term self-supported, and self-supported means that it's really you and the stuff on your bike, and that's kind of it. There are going to be stops along the way. You are going to, you've planned for places to get water. You've planned for places to camp. You've planned for, mechanical issues, first aid issues, nutrition. Everything is up to you essentially, right? So that's kind of like the biggest leap of faith when you're just saying, hey, I'm going on a self-supported trip. And that's the kind of stuff that we do out of the shop. I think that it's just more rewarding. I mean, not that any other thing is less rewarding maybe, but it's just the nature of what we feel that people here want to do and what we want to do. So I want to go camping and I want to throw up a tent, and I want to cook and those kinds of things. So that's the kind of stuff that we do. So that's what's called self-supported. And I was trying to do this presentation and see if I can like produce every image like from my archives. This is for, we did a trip into the Adirondacks last summer. We do an 8-day Adirondack kind of loop. So this is a nice picture of that. But there were some trip types that we just never did or do, so I had to go online to find pictures of these things. Like this is one of them. Supported tour. Supported means that, and usually it's a van or some sort of, usually a van, that you are riding with your stuff on the bike, but there's a van following you, or there's some support that's kind of with you to provide assistance, be it first aid or mechanical. You know, you are going to camp generally. Maybe you're riding with some of the stuff on your bike and they're just transporting like tents. I mean, it gets a little gray, but it's a nice way to kind of like not have the stress of, doing self-supported stuff can be stressful. And when you're trying to manage a group of 40 people, it can be really stressful to make sure everyone has all the things that they need. So you'll see these, a lot of companies do these. There's companies all throughout the Midwest and the West that you pay a lot of money and they just support the whole thing, and it's, and the food is kind of provided, everyone cooks together, but it's a little, it's like a little bit supported, not totally supported. Okay, the next one is bike packing. Bike packing is another buzzword that is kind of hard to define because it talks a little more about the surfaces you're riding on and the kind of gear that you're taking. So this is a trip we did to Vermont a couple years ago, but bike packing tends to be more off-road and dirt road. It can be, and they're mostly self-supported. Venture bikes generally use frame bags because, and we'll get into in the next couple slides how to attach stuff to the bike, because sometimes when you're on a situation that's a multi-surface or a dirt road and you have a rack and you have panniers and everything starts rattling around and stuff, it can become kind of a challenge. So the idea is that you'll use frame bags, and I can show you what that means. You start to see in this picture here, everything's kind of like attached onto the bike, and but we'll talk about that in a sec. Bike packing. End to end, this is something that I didn't have any pictures for, so I had to kind of find a nice image. And this lets you really focus on the riding, right? This is basically, you're going from one place to the next. Maybe it's supported, maybe it's an organized event where the inns are all planned out and your stuff and food and clothing is kind of moved ahead for you. It just really lets you just focus on the ride and really it isn't as stressful. All the things about food and sleep and mechanical and first aid are taken care of. Would you kind of, I've never done one of these actually, so it sounds like you've done.
No, I just stayed at like a
warm
motel.
Showers. Okay.
Yeah, I went from Seattle to the San Juan Islands with a friend a couple years ago, and then we biked around, but we just stayed at a hostel and loaded stuff on the bike.
Cool. That's great, yeah. Yeah, you see a lot of these in Europe, a lot of these maybe retired folks and maybe folks that have a lot of discretionary income that you start to see stuff like this because, as we all get older, it's not so fun, maybe camping isn't as fun as it used to be outside. But that's a popular thing. It's also called credit card touring or end-to-end touring, meaning that you don't have to carry a lot of stuff on your bike, right? So you can rent a bike and do it and just kind of go up. You don't need to think about all the things that are going to be on your bike. All right, and then the last thing is what we do a lot of, which is called I call them micro tours. The other term you hear is what's called sub 24, meaning that this trip lasts less than 24 hours. Ours don't last less than 24 hours, but that's a term that you hear. And we do a ton of these. Leave on a Saturday, come back on a Sunday. It's all self-supported. There's a low barrier for entry. The idea is to get people involved. There are a wide range of skill levels, a wide range of backgrounds, as the city we live in. Last year, for the first time, at the last 2 or 3 trips, we had more women than men on the trip, which that number was always climbing for years, and they finally swapped over a little bit, which is really interesting. And we like to have for every 7 or 8 people, someone kind of like a guide. The guides that we kind of bring along with us, or we kind of deputize from the group, just to make sure everyone makes it. Because if you're thinking about riding like from here, 60 miles from here with 40 people, you're going to get separated. It's like kind of being at the beach, and all of a sudden you're like drifting away from everybody. It happens very, very fast. So we try to really, stay on top of, having we do an orientation class. Everyone has maps and all these kinds of things. But things happen and people drift away. So we make sure that it's really safe, and we haven't lost anybody. People get lost for sure. I mean, whole groups get lost, but it's kind of no one ever talks about the trip that went perfectly well. Everyone talks about the disasters.
More fun.
Yeah, more memories. All right, so now we're going to talk about different ways to carry stuff on the bike, right? So this is what's called the rack and pannier system. This is very, very common. This methodology has been around for decades in terms of carrying stuff. High capacity, right? It's probably the most volume you're going to get in terms of carrying stuff on the bike. It's easy to set up. It's just on a rack on the bike, very easy. Very common in that if you need to buy another one or something breaks, any bike shop will know what you're talking about. Easy to organize. What I mean by that is like, when I do a pannier setup, it's like, all right, the stuff on my left is like my food and my tools. The stuff on my right is clothes. So you're not constantly, because you're stopping 2-3 times a day. You're not constantly digging through everything to like find your stuff. You kind of organizing it. I've been on trips where people actually draw these little diagrams of where their stuff is. Just kind of a little attentive, but they kind of these diagrams of where everything was, and that's where they put everything. And I guess in the middle of the night, if you need something, maybe it's easier to know where to go, or if it's raining and dive through everything, which is a real pain. All right, so this is a very common, and most bikes can do a version of this. Most bikes, you put a rack on the rear and have bags. On the front, it depends on what's going on in the fork in terms of you're going to be able to put a rack on the front of your bike. Frame bags. Okay, so this is like the skiing to snowboarding kind of duality. There's these two different worlds. This is like the wild and crazy world. The other one's a lot more formal. So this is frame bags, right? This the nice thing about frame bags is that you're not carrying the weight of the rack, right? Because when you think about panniers, it's like I've got the weight of the rack, I've got the panniers, I've got the stuff in the panniers. So you're not carrying the weight of the rack. You're also not carrying the mechanical, the potential of mechanical failure of a rack kind of coming off. We did a trip in the Catskills in the fall, and a woman's rack just snapped off, and everything just, like a yard sale. And then in the middle of nowhere, we had to like fix her rack because there was really no other way she had to carry her stuff. So we fixed it, but things can happen on a rack. All the weight is now on the center line of the bike, right? And there's some advantages to having all the weight on the center line of the bike as opposed to having the weight kind of sticking out. Also, as things kind of protrude out to the side, you can knock into something or hit a guardrail or a branch. And it kind of forces you to be a minimalist. It kind of really, like a pannier, you're going to fill, however big it is, you're just going to fill it. It's just human nature. I always tell people it's like with wedding planning. If you have 2 weeks to plan a wedding or 3 years, you're going to take all that time to plan it. If you have a pannier, you're going to just fill it. It's just human nature just to fill it. And there are ways to kind of do, so this is a real quick comparison of like liters. The bike world is really, really interesting in the way that it deals with units. There's a lot of imperial units. There's a lot of things that are metric. All these tools are metric, but there's a lot of things in bikes that are not metric. It's just a really weird, basically, as stuff from England started to get copied in Asia, the disconnect of foot and inches versus metric and converting things and all those things kind of started to create these two divergent paths. So you see things like liters all the time. I don't know much about liters in my daily life, but I know about liters in relation to how much stuff I can carry on a bike. So for instance, this rack and pannier system on the left, 48 liters is the pair, 32 liters is the pair. So that's a pair, 48, 58, 68, so 70 liters of stuff. And it's not counting all the extra little bags and all kinds of little doodads this person has on their bike. Just as an order of magnitude, it's about 70. This one, I did this math before, but I forgot. 20, 30, 46, 47. So you're dealing with obviously less capacity. So you have to be more creative with what you do. You have to be a little more of a minimalist with what you do. What I do on my trips is that I do a packing list, and I can show you an example of that where, if I didn't use something, I really take a look at, God, why am I packing this thing again? I've been on like 11 of these trips and I've never used this thing. Do I pack it again? God, this thing, oh, I watch this movie over and over. Frame bags also cost a little more. They're a little more fussy, and they also have to be kind of potentially fitted to the bike. Like that inner triangle where it says 10. That little triangular bag is different for each bike, so you have to kind of get it fitted to your bag. And I like using frame bags only because it forces me to be minimalist. But there is this school of thought where I'd rather be looking at it than looking for it, right? If you're missing something in the middle of nowhere, I'd rather be looking at it than looking like, well, why didn't I bring that? Why didn't I pack that? On the trips that we do, there's so many people have so much stuff. Like I've gone on the trips with no food, I just didn't get it because I knew people were bringing tons of food, and everyone has like a million can openers. And actually, can openers, the can openers that have the hook on it? Every single trip, I'm teaching someone, a younger person, how to actually use like an old-fashioned can opener like that. Like, I need a can opener. You have one on your tool. Let me show you how to use it. I mean, it's a pain, but almost every single trip I'm teaching someone how to use a can opener. I was going to do a little video of how to use a can opener for our next trip. So this is like a hybrid setup. And these are two bikes that I've used on recent trips. So you'll see this bike here is the bike I did the Catskills in, which is like a 5-day trip. Tried to keep it as small as possible. On the front of the bike is tent and sleeping bag. So this side you're seeing a tent. The other side of the fork would be a sleeping bag, and then just 2 panniers in the back, and that was it. A lot of times touring bikes will have 3 water bottle holders, so it's like the green one down below. And that's the one that gets really dirty, and the green one is like the emergency, like, break glass in case of an emergency. Like if I've gone through, what I try to do with water is drink a lot. You never wait till you're thirsty, right? You're just drinking all day. Any chance I get to fill up water, I'll finish all of my water and fill it up again. Any chance I'll take, because you just never know. And if you do get caught, like that last bottle on the bottom, the green one is like the emergency one. But we usually tell people to take at least 2 water bottles. We'll talk about nutrition and hydration in a sec. So that's the setup with this. This is a setup where I use like a front rack, a platform rack, and put a big, what's called a porteur bag on the front. Not a great setup, really heavy. There's a front rack, there's this big heavy bag, stuff in it. On the rear, not the greatest setup in the world because there just wasn't enough clearance. But I'm always trying different things to kind of just test things out, because people come to us with questions all the time, so I'm trying to like test things out a little bit. All right, so in terms of what you're bringing, the big forks in the road that I always, when people come in and talk to us about going on trips, is like where are you sleeping and how are you eating, right? And those are 2 major big decisions. The sleeping decision talks about, all right, I'm doing warm showers. I'm gonna stay at a hotel. I have a plan. I have a friend on the way, and that just means you're not carrying a tent and a sleeping bag. A tent, the sleeping bag, and the sleeping pad are the 3 biggest volume things that you have to carry. They might not be the heaviest, but they're just going to take up the most space. So if you're going on a trip where you're going to do warm showers the whole time, well, you don't need to bring any of that, right? So that's what I always try to get to people. It's like, are you camping? Are you camping outside? If the answer is yes, then we have to talk about tent, sleeping bag, and sleeping pad. The other thing is food, right? If you are going to be involved in your own food, well, that means you're going to have to bring a stove and materials to make things and fire and starting fire and all that kind of stuff. If you're not, if you have places you're going to stay and stop during the day, and you can bring like energy bars with you, that's an option too, because not having to bring a stove stove is kind of a heavy, relatively clunky kind of thing, and to get that out of all your gear is a good thing if you're going to not cook outside. Like if you're just not going to cook outside, you don't need to bring it. And there's different kinds of stoves. There's all different ways to talk about emergency food and stuff like that. But just having those energy bars is just going to be more than enough unless you're really going remote. And if that's the case, you should probably be cooking. So those are two big questions that I always ask. So then, getting into talking about the gear that we bring, I'm going to try to pull up a packing list in a second. But we actually have done classes on this. In the 30s, there was a Seattle mountain climbing club in the 1930s came up with this idea about outdoor gear and what you should bring. Certainly things have changed over time. They didn't have GPS back then, it was a compass. But in terms of the systems, they've all, and you can look this up, you look up these the 10 essentials, you'll find that. So these are things that I make sure that I have, I guess, a checklist in terms of packing and everything like that. And I overpack a little bit because if I am leading a trip, my first aid kit has to be bigger and my tools have to be more than I would bring for just me. And so I have to kind of overpack a little bit. So, I'll just run through this real quick. Navigation talks about it in GPS and a Garmin and all those things. And we always insist that people bring paper maps. Right? Because I always tell people, imagine your phone and your battery's dead and you're lost, right? And or you're with your friend and she knows where we're going, but what if you lose her, right? So you always want to have like a paper kind of trail, but a paper version of the map. And we even draw out. I'll even try to look one up. I draw out almost like a cartoon map. That's almost like the back of a kid's menu on a restaurant, like almost like a treasure map, but incredibly simple that everyone can download and just have. It has the phone numbers, that has like really big, the Hudson River is here, that we're like, it's like these really big kind of moves. Because looking at maps, some people can't read maps really well. You're talking about cue sheets, which we'll talk about in a second. Cue sheets are like linear directions that are very kind of formalized for bike travel. And it's really hard to decipher and hard to kind of graphically understand what's going on if you're not familiar. Sun protection, sure. Insulation, sure. Illumination, that means even if we're going during the day, I'll bring lights on the bike just because, if you're dealing with, we were in late October in the Catskills and we had some daylight issue challenges. The sun's going down at like 6:12 and we're leaving camp and we have to ride like 70 miles, and I know the algebra of like what we're going to do today is going to end us in the dark. Like there's no two ways about it. So I always bring lights with me, and I leave them on during the day generally. What's going on with this? Just totally flipping out all the time. Thanks for being patient. It is a good movie. Get like 10 minutes out of it when it clashes. First aid supplies, on our trips we tell people like make a first aid kit. We'll have a first aid kit. Just have some stuff with you, Band-Aids, gauze, first aid spray. The issues that you have on a bike are, unless you're breaking collarbones and wrists, are kind of rashy, kind of, if there's a bit of a spill and things like that. So things to kind of deal with, kind of road rash essentially. Repair fire. I like to bring 3 ways to make fire, which multiplied by 40 people on the trip, we have like 100 ways to make a fire. But I like to bring matches, a lighter, and like a fire starter, something. Maybe there's a new thing I want to try out, but just ways to make fire and multiple ways to make fire, and they're cheap and small. You don't need to spend a lot of money on a repair kit, and that's a multi-tool and a tube and a pump if you're going to get into changing your own flat. Hydration, which is water. Nutrition, which is food. Emergency shelter. I always bring, and this kind of talks about if you were hiking and you needed to camp. Well, the nature of what we're talking about is you're kind of camping anyway, so you have your tent. I always bring a an emergency blanket, one of those like foil blankets, just to have with me in case someone at night is underdressed, or if we're doing a trip in April, if we're doing a trip in October, you can get into. I mean, we got into the mid-20s overnight in the Catskills in October, and that's kind of cold overnight, So if people aren't prepared, we want to have stuff to help them out. And then safety. So the way that we run the trips, it's we have an insurance company. We actually, for every trip that we do, we produce a kind of an emergency action plan. I call it like a ride program that everyone has to read, and it really talks about like when we're leaving, where all the hospitals are, what happens in an emergency, what all the procedures in terms of what happens when things go wrong, just so our insurance company knows that we're kind of organized, and also the people that are going on the trip know that there's a plan in place. But it lists all the bike shops, it lists, again, all the hospitals and all these kinds of phone numbers and all these kind of connections. So we also bring, I bring a satellite phone. I mean, it's a satellite texting device essentially, where it allows you to kind of connect when you don't have cell phone service, which is connected to a satellite. Never had to use it in duress. We've used it for fun, but we've never used it like, there's a button on the side that calls a helicopter. Like I subscribe to this thing and I get charged like $1 billion, but there's a button on the side of this thing that you open it up and it's like you have to press it hard, but it's like for mountaineering, and it's really crazy, and we've never had to use it for bad things, which is good. And what you're seeing here is a cue sheet, which is it's hard to see, and I'll show you an example in a little bit, but these are the tools that we would use. This is my first aid kit, kind of opened up, upside down, but just trying to think about all the eventualities, from bee sting stuff to upside down, and it's hard to see, is this these kind of really creepy, scary things like this blood clotting stuff that was like developed because of like the Iraqi war and like the IEDs and the explosions of ripping body parts. It's like this stuff that army medics use to stop bleeding, and it like turns into like this. It's horrible to even think about like the reasons for the use cases, but it's for clotting, in case there's an issue right there. And we also I bring a splint, which is this guy here. And again, this is slight overkill, but a lot of bike injuries tend to be of the kind of broken stuff. So we all got wilderness first aid certified last year, so it just freaked us all out more than anything else about like, oh my God, all these eventualities. So I bring this just to splint. Alright, so next what I'm talking about is, actually let me pull up a packing list real quick just to kind of show you an example of, and what we do is I do a packing list and I make it available to everyone on the ride, and it's as a Google Doc. So, let's see here. And I weigh things. I'm not like a weight person. I don't care that much how much things weigh. I'm not like trying to like shave off the matches to make them lighter or anything like that. I just do it as a comparison so I can just look at order of magnitude between one setup and the next. Hey, this was 10% lighter or 20% lighter. Let's see if I have to do the packing sheet. Alright, so again, I don't expect you guys to actually see this from where you are, but what I do is I organize things like bike accessories, tools, and I kind of work my way down. Clothes packed, clothes that are on me. I like spreadsheets, so cooking kit, shelter and sleep. So these are all the things. These are the weights in pounds and the weights in grams. So, and then notes and things like that. So it's just a helpful way to kind of understand what I'm bringing, and also it's a really good tool for people to use that are going on the first time, and they'll always say things like, "Oh my God, you bring all that stuff. You're bringing so much stuff," and a lot of my stuff is very light, so it's not like I'm bringing tons and tons of stuff, but it just lets people know like the kind of the breadth of what you kind of need to think about on these trips. All right, trip planning. So there's a lot of tools out there to plan a trip. There are, and I tend to use a combination of Google Docs and then a program called Ride with GPS, but there's a lot of very similar things to Ride with GPS. So what I'll do with Google Docs is I will, Google Docs, Google Maps, which is just this interface over here. I'll kind of open it up and just start thinking about where we're going to end up. I don't use it for routing necessarily, but I use it to locate stuff, right? Like, show me all the hospitals on this route, show me all the bike shops on this route, where are the places to get food. So I use it in that way because I think that it's obviously a great tool to understand that. And then what I'll do is I'll use this tool called Ride with GPS, which is over here, that will actually allow me to start creating a route that I can share, right? Because the idea is that I want to create a route in a map, and then I want to export that information and give it to everyone on the trip so everyone is doing the same thing. So that tool looks like, so it looks like any other mapping tool. And let's say if I wanted to start, I'll start at 718. Terrible typist. Yeah. So I'm starting right here. This is where we're at in Brooklyn, and I'll. A lot of times I won't really go to the end because so this is a trip we're going on in May. So let me just hit this as an endpoint and see what it does. Now it's going to route all the way back down. And what I would do if I didn't know this route, so I'm letting this is a mapping software, and it's relative to bikes. Like it looks for bike lanes, it looks for efficient routes, and there's a paid version where you can get a little more functionality. It gives you the it's 47.8 miles. It gives you the profile down at the bottom there. I can export this out as a file to give to people to use on their phone. But what I'll do is, if I didn't know this route at all and I am not really sure what's going on, I will start working my way through some of these points that look, what the hell is going on here? And you can use, this thing has a street map, so I can just look and say, what's going on here? I know what's going on here. Is it a street? Is it basically what I'm doing is I'm just, if it was a route that I was unfamiliar with from start to finish, I would just kind of march through to look at the roads and see what kind of roads they were. Is it like a super highway? Is it a dirt road? Is it a road that's closed? Is it a sidewalk? And I would just work my way, and it's tedious, right? It's unless you're, a lot of times on routes that we haven't done before, I'll either go ride them myself and just literally just ride them, or I'll drive sometimes. I'll drive up from going upstate. I'll take my car and drive the route and just drive it exactly the way that we would. It must be something. Change focus is this. It must be something about that thing.
What was that site called?
It's called Ride with GPS.
Okay.
Will that give you flatter routes as well if you want them to make it
Yeah.
easier? If you want to say, actually, I don't want to do much climbing.
Right.
What's my easiest, gentlest one?
Yes, it does.
It does.
And you can have things like avoid highways or avoid dirt roads or but most of those tools, they're probably all using just Google information, but
it's useful to have it to plan a route that will give you, sort of the style of riding that you want to do. And if you want to do climbs, then fine. But if you don't, because you're doing,
And you can save them, and we save them, we share them. We have other people that, there was a route that you had used from us that we didn't use. It's like people use them. They're not, you don't own them. They're not proprietary. So what I'll then do is you can actually. So over here, and this is hard to see, this is a cue sheet, and basically what it's saying is, and again, I don't expect you guys to read it, but it's basically saying turn left on 9th Street, turn right on Smith Street. It's kind of like the way the GPS would give you on a car or any kind of device like that. But what you can actually do is you can actually print them out, and let's see if I can print it here in a cue sheet. Show the see like even there's some bags. Most kind of like old school touring bike bags that fit on the front handlebars have a little like plastic sleeve that you can put your like cue sheets in, right? And it's actually just gonna open up some cue sheets that I know I've done some. So here's the ground to a halt. So this, God, this is driving me crazy. So this is what a cue sheet looks like. It'll print a map out usually, and then it'll be these sheets that are kind of like meant to kind of 8.5 by 11 are meant to kind of fold into fourths, and you kind of use them and flip them over. But they are very abstract, and they're not graphical in any way. You kind of have to, if you're not following them along, it's hard to know when you're lost. Like, where am I? I don't know. But we produce these for every trip, and these are produced right out of the software in this format, so it's really nice. Because there are people that it's like reading Braille almost. There are people that are really used to reading them, and they really want cue sheets. And then again, the ability to kind of like warehouse and save these trips, because again, we do this trip every year, and nothing's changed between the first time we did it and the next time we're doing it. So I'll just go over the route just to make sure it's all set. But there, a lot of times you start doing the same route over and over again. I mean, the good part is you get good at knowing exactly where we're going to stop and where lunch is going to happen and things like that. So that's a big part of the repetition of some of the trips that we do. But we are looking to do more trips this year. Let's see. All right, so that was trip planning, and again, I didn't finish this, but again, in the trip planning, understanding eating and sleeping, and finding these locations on your route and kind of getting them set up. And you can actually, in this ride with GPS, you can actually add little nodes, like, hey, this is where there's a restaurant, so your GPS device will tell you how many miles it is to get there, that kind of thing. Local trips. So these are some of the trips. We're down here. These are some of the trips that we generally do. So you're generally going to be in about a 60-mile radius in terms of what you can do in a day with a group of people that have a wide range of abilities. 60 miles is kind of long, and you have to make sure you leave early. And that trip, you have to really make sure that you are hitting all of our, kind of milestones in terms of speed. We try to keep moving at about 10 miles an hour. That's kind of a rough rule of thumb. But with stops, it kind of comes down to about 7 or 8 miles an hour when you average it out over the whole day. And again, I'm constantly like the algebra of like, we're 40 miles away and it's like 6 o'clock. We're not going 40 miles an hour to get there in an hour. So, constantly kind of moving the group along to understand that, when you're camping, you want to get to the campsite not at night. You want to get there during the day. So leaving earlier in the morning and understanding the algebra of what the day kind of needs. So there are trips in Brooklyn, like Flibben Field is the orange star right down below. We've done stuff in New Jersey. The ones that are way, way, way up there are things where we've taken a train and gotten exit velocity and then able to ride. The one on the river there is Ferncliff Forest, I believe. We did that last year. And then the one way up in the corner is up in Massachusetts. So we take the commuter train to Wassaic, which is like a 2.5-hour train ride, and then ride 44 miles into New York, into Connecticut, and then into Massachusetts and camp overnight and come back. So it's cool to be like 3 states away, either on a bike and public transportation. So there's a lot of great trips, and we've documented all the stuff on our website. If you have any questions about local trips, just stop by or call or email me. I can kind of get you on the right path. And resources. There's tons of resources out there, and I'm not including us as like the top 3 of ever. I just figured we can just filter a lot of stuff. There's so much stuff out there. But the first 2 are really, really awesome. The Adventure Cycling Association, which is the magazine. They're great. They were born out of the 1976 like ride across America for the bicentennial. So that's where the origin story kind of starts, and they're based in Missoula, Montana. And they produce tons of maps, right? I have some of them here from, I do have some of those here. They produce these really interesting maps, and these are very, very, very formalized in how they do their mapping. But it does them in these little panels, and the panels change direction as they're not north is up all the time. It's a really interesting way of kind of doing a map. It's just a weird mapping system, a convention that they use. But they've been doing maps for a very, very long time, and if you remember, you can buy their maps cheaper. They're on like waterproof paper and stuff like that. So they're a great organization. It's a nonprofit, and there's a lot of resources. Bikepacking.com is a little more about the bikepacking side of things, but a great website for just tons of trips and tons of reviews of gear, right? Tons of like, if you're thinking about a bag or something, that's the place to go to like look at someone who's used the bag or the forums and stuff. And I put our website, because we have a resources tab, and our resources tab has information about, we've done, let's see. Moving down the list on our resources tab, the 10 essentials, which talks about the packing and gear, micro tour primer, which is kind of getting people ready to go on a micro tour, Bike Builder Archives, packing list, tent and sleeping bag guides. We do a camp stove guide, the Gowanus Bike Route Depository. That's where we save all of our routes and stuff. Travel log. This is where we kind of just basically have every single trip we've ever done kind of listed in blog form, and it gives all the maps and everything. So it just goes from, it goes all the way back to God knows when, but you can check out any one of these trips if you're thinking about a trip, and you'll have all the information about it. So and yeah, that's I take a lot of pictures too. I like taking pictures. So these go all the way back. Yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of all I have in terms of me yapping and talking. Do you guys have any thoughts or questions or discussions or? Yeah.
I have a question about food.
Yeah.
Like, what's the most common thing that you take that's like the easiest?
What's easy is peanut butter tortilla.
Oh,
It's like the
okay.
real common, like in terms of like going away, like the trips that we do, the overnight trips.
Yeah.
I always joke that we're never more than like 50 feet from civilization, right? You never,
Right.
the micro tours, you're not like in the wilderness. Like this is not remote. But people that do remote trips and longer trips, you start thinking about like packing as much calories into the densest thing possible, right?
Mm.
So I actually just got these samples. I'm not selling these, but anyway, these are it's trail butter, which is like this spread, this like high protein spread that's supposed to go on like a bread or a tortilla. I don't know about this, but we get stuff sent to us all the time. But peanut butter is really popular. Peanut butter on
Yeah.
tortilla, because you have all those carbs and everything, and then the protein of the peanut butter. So that's really popular. Trying to think what's the energy stuff. Energy bars are great. I always use. I don't like to use too much of that because it's a lot of processed kind of food. You don't want to have. Like basically candy bars all day. I always take electrolyte tablets. Something called Noon. I don't know if there's a bunch of companies that make them, but I always have one of my water bottles with electrolyte. Like that's like the rocket fuel. And one is regular water. One is like electrolyte, just because I do think that they help during the day. But in terms of like food, the micro tours are weird because people bring. I've seen people make paella, I've seen people make pizza, I've seen people do chili cheese fries. Like people go nuts to show off like their cooking skills. Like it becomes like this unbelievable like mountain of crazy food. There's so much food, and people really get into camp cooking and all these techniques and different stoves. And And that's always really fun to see. Some guy did a 4 cheese macaroni and cheese one time. I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff. But if you're really going away, you know, and you're going to be remote, I'm trying to think of other things that I've used and I've thought of and I've heard of over the years. The peanut butter tortilla thing seems to be fun. So,
That sounds good.
did you have a question about?
Yeah, I was gonna ask about like shops in the city that would rent trick bikes.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a thing?
We used to do it, and we're probably going to do it again. And you know, getting the person set up for all kinds of stuff. So I don't know of any shops that ever did that. We had done it. We had a much bigger shop. We had the infrastructure to do that. We're probably going to do that again. It becomes a challenge because you have to stock all the different sizes, and there's like no space. But it would be us, but it won't be for a few months. You know, until we get our kind of act together. I don't know. And that's not to exclude. Just because I don't know doesn't mean anyone else doesn't do it. But I don't. Over the years, I haven't heard of anyone who rents. You know, a shop like Ride Brooklyn, which is over on Bergen between 5th and Flatbush, they rent a lot of bikes. So I would imagine that they potentially would have some road bikes or touring bikes like they might. I just don't know what their rental fee looks like. But they were the places that we would send rentals all the time for non-touring stuff. So that's a place to check out.
Cool.
I can't think of really anyone else. Any other questions? Yeah?
So something that's always been a barrier for me is understanding camping gear, because it doesn't make any sense to me. What's like both in terms of like what you need and like a cost outlay, like what do you think is like a basic set for just doing like I don't know, like a micro tour or something a little longer than that?
Yeah, I mean it's sleeping bag, tent, and sleeping pad, right? Those are the three the three things that I really think about a lot. And that, to start with the tent, most people come to this with a tent that they had in college or something, or a tent that they use like for camping with their family, and it's way too big. The tent, like right there next to you, if you grab that like gray thing, like that's a tent. That's a $450 tent, but that's a tent. That's probably the pinnacle of small but functional tents. Not to say REI, but I know REI has, there's a tent called, is it the Half Dome, that people use a lot? I see that on the trip a lot. And it comes down to, and I have a spreadsheet on our website that goes through all the different tents, because it's basically, it's an equation of how much you're spending versus how heavy it is and versus the volume that you're getting, right? It's those three things you want to like spend, you know, the least amount to get the biggest space and the tiniest tent. Like those two things aren't going to actually happen. So there's that. The sleeping pad, we have a thing on our website too about sleeping pads. There's either an inflatable sleeping pad or a rigid, like a kind of an accordion foam sleeping pad that people like to use. And you know, I like the inflatable one because it's much smaller and you can travel with it easier. But the downside of it is, you know, if it's inflatable, there could be something you can get messed up, right? So you do see people on a lot of our trips with those like foldable accordion. They look like foil, almost like sleeping pads, like the rigid boards that are folded accordion style. I'm not a fan of those, but I know a lot of people use them because they're never going to go. They're not going to get deflated. And then the sleeping bag thing becomes a challenge because if you're talking about varying conditions, you know, like we go camping when it's 20 degrees out, we'll go camping when it's like 90 degrees out. So it's like, how do you deal with a sleeping bag that's going to deal with all those things without having 4 sleeping bags? And again, most people come at this with a really big sleeping bag they use for like 6th grade sleepovers, like because no one, you know, none of us as adults are buying sleeping bags or want to own a sleeping bag. we rent some sleeping bags too, but in the summer, when it's in the high summer, like June, July, I won't even take a sleeping bag. I'll take it's like a blanket. It's like a sleeping bag. It's just like a one-sided sleeping bag. It's almost like a quilt, and it folds down really small because in the summer I just don't want to be in a sleeping bag. But what happens with sleeping bags is that as they're rated for different temperatures, right? You'll have a 20-degree bag, a 30-degree bag, and those are talking about temperatures that you'll be comfortable in at that temperature. As those bags get rated for colder and colder temperatures, they get more expensive, and they get bigger, right? They get, because there's more and more stuff in them to kind of make that happen, unless you're getting out in front of that by paying so much that it's tiny. So I have like a 30-degree bag that I like, that I use, but getting that bag nice and small, because sleeping bags the volume is the killer on sleeping bags, not really the weight. So you could spend between 100 and 200 and have like a nice sleeping bed that you're gonna have for a long time if you take care of it and keep it clean. I've seen folks, get a lot of stuff on Amazon and, people, it works. And I've seen, if you're just doing like a one trip thing, that's fine. But if you're really, really going to rely on a piece of gear for a long time, you kind of get what you pay for. But a tent, I've seen like in the 220, 230 world, I've seen some decent tents that I would consider, versatile, durable enough to kind of be used multiple times for a lot of things. Nemo is a company. I use stuff from Big Agnes, but that gets a little expensive. But Nemo's a great brand too. And then REI does have a lot of things on sale, and much as I rather buy it for me, I don't have the selection REI has, and they're a great company. So did that answer anything? It's just kind of talking in circles about those three items, but those are the three things that you really have to.
I didn't know I needed those three items, so
What's that?
I'm further. I didn't know those were the three items, so okay. I'm closer than I was before.
Okay. In terms of cooking, there's different stoves for different fuel types, and I have a thing on our website. We do a camp cooking class a couple times a year, which is really fun. But just talking about the different gas types and if you're traveling internationally, what stove you're going to use. If you're, some stoves are more efficient than others, some are more expensive than others. But the overnights, you can really the margin for error is, you can really mess it up and be fine because you're with such a big group of people and there's like support system. So, any other questions? Yeah.
I'm really interested in the route planning, and so you covered a lot that I was already gonna ask.
Okay.
But
that's good.
I'm curious about planning from afar, like if you can't drive the route, or
right.
maybe you don't have a friend that did it. Like, how do you make sure you're doing like the safest route?
Yeah,
possible?
I'm actually doing that right now because we're planning a trip. We're planning. I might do something in Idaho this summer, and I've never ridden a bike in Idaho, and right. So I'm doing exactly what you're describing, and I'm looking for other people that have done similar things, right? Because there's I hate to say the internet, but the internet's going to be full of people that have done that route or near it. But I really just I march along with Street View on Google, to see like how big is the shoulder of the highway that I'm on, this country road, or what does that road kind of look like? Yeah, it is kind of, because once you do it once, like we do the Adirondacks every summer. This is like the 5th year we're doing it, so I can do it like with my eyes closed, which is great because you're leading people and you want them to have confidence in you as a leader, and you've done it. But the first time we did it, was like we were in the dark. So there's always that first time where it's so hard, right? And I just on a trip at a place I haven't been, I'll use Google Maps, and every 200 feet almost, I'll just keep looking and looking and looking. That's the best you can. Considering 20 years ago you didn't have that, I don't know what you would have done. What did people do before Google Maps? So yeah, there's really no great answer for that I know of. But even like I like looking at the maps, but with the satellite image turned on, you get a better sense of like what's really going on, because a map kind of can lull you to sleep with just the graphics of it, and say, it's like there's a blue pond there, and there's a green forest there. Like, what does that mean? Like, what does that really mean?
It's all flat.
Yeah, and definitely looking at contours too, and understanding, like taking the route I'm doing in Google and throwing it into Rabbit GPS, because then that'll tell you, because Google Maps doesn't do a good job of like understanding or letting you know what the grade is, because it assumes you're in a car and you don't care how steep the hill is. So kind of going back and forth with those two tools to see what the elevations are. And then planning, I think of like 60 miles a day. I know people do more, I know people do less, but that's a good number to kind of use as a starting point. But that's just that's a rough planning thing that I use to start. Anything else?
I was going to ask about if you were thinking of buying either a light touring bike or your you touched on what's saving the bike industry at the moment is gravel bikes.
Yeah.
What have I read about? GRX.
The new Shimano
group sets.
Yeah, it's great. It's great for gravel.
But what would I look for in terms of size of cassette and you know,
well,
front
GRX, the
chainrings.
GRX stuff, there aren't too many there's
No, there aren't.
that's a great. I mean,
yeah, one's out because it's for 9 speeds or something. So it depends on whatever speed you want as well. Because I think that a couple of them.
Yeah,
are,
GRX is like 11 speed and
the top
12 speed.
The top one is the DI2 stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, that's 12 speed, which is a single in the front. So if you want a 2 chainring in the front with GRX, you're going to be 11 speed in the back, or potentially 10 speed.
But would you accept what the stock?
Yeah, it was designed for. The other thing too is that with the capacity of how big, basically how big the cassette can be in the back, the derailleur is kind of rated for that eventuality, right? So you couldn't match a cassette that's too big for a derailleur.
No, of course not. But you might want to turn around and I don't know.
It's pretty big.
Swap out a chainring or something that just makes it more comfortable for you. I just wondered what would be the most comfortable sort of...
Making the smaller chainring smaller. That's the easiest way to kind of give yourself more of a gear range.
Sure.
Is as opposed to like messing around with the cassette, because cassettes are big and expensive, and the chainring is just a single chainring. So if I had a bike that I wanted more of a range,
more lower range, easier,
I would try to
takes you down to just before you fall off.
Super spinny.
Keeps you going.
And there's a lot of great gear calculators that I use that are graphic that I'll use to compare one bike to another, because you start realizing there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of there's a lot of gears that are the same in different chain rings and stuff like that. But I'll use might as well just watch it around, right? See how this ends. Oh, this is great. This is like this in the Tour de France. They used to protest in some of these villages and not let the riders through. So these guys just kind of have stopped and throwing all these newspapers with the riders, so the riders can't get through. It's kind of a funny moment in this movie that I've seen every day. I have the same playlist over and over again. So these guys moving.
Bizarrely, the history with the Tour de France was that they used to do end to end, and they used to cycle to an inn.
Yeah.
And then they'd have a meal set up, wine, a full 5-course meal, and then they'd head off the following day. Just the original sort of thing. Whereas now they'd be frightened to death to do that.
Eddie Merckx isn't going to deal with that at all. I was like, nope, I'm not doing this. They didn't have derailleurs for a long time either. The Tour de France really didn't let the riders use derailleurs until like the late 40s because they felt it was cheating.
Yeah.
And
we talk about e-bikes being cheating now.
Take your wheel off and turn it around and get a different gear on it and everything. Anyway.
But yeah, okay, so I just wondered whether there was sort of...
There's not a lot of in modern componentry, there's not a lot of wiggle room. There's not a lot of customization you can do. They kind of...
So it'd be down to the bike that you buy rather than the fiddling around with the bike afterwards.
The GRX is going to be the same on every bike you get. Alchegra's going to be the same. It's like there isn't a lot of... the stuff gets kind of proprietary in its sizing.
But is GRX what they say it is?
That's nice for ground. It's a wide range 2x because no one makes... There isn't a modern, what I would consider high-end drivetrain that's a triple in the front. It's all been relegated to it's just not what they're focusing on. They're not. So the next best thing is the GRX stuff, which is really, really nice.
So you trust that?
Yeah. We've done a few installs. They came out last May. So
I see on your bike list you've got on quite a few of them.
Yeah, we've done a bunch. I like it a lot. It's a great.
I just wondered whether it was just the next gimmick that.
No, and there's
there's
different flavors.
Yeah,
and there's different...
all it is like a copy of that, but we won't call it that. We'll call it a gravel one instead, and that'll be cool.
What Shimano kind of fell behind with was some of the they fell behind in the world of having a single chainring in the front, and that was really popular. And SRAM kind of got out ahead, so this is them kind of
pulling back,
answering that, and they both make great stuff. It's one here. It's great.
Sure.
And these guys are all putting stickers on their back too. Watch when they go past, they're slipping these stickers on the backs of these guys. You see, they put a sticker on his back. It's crazy. He's like, yeah, whatever. Anyway, it's funny stuff. All right, well that's kind of all I have. Any questions or any kind of thoughts? You can email us and come by. This is what we do, and love to be a resource for you guys. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much.
So you like big Agnes stuff in bag stuff and things like that, or
I mean,
is that because they sort you out when it comes apart, or is that because
it doesn't come apart? You know, it's like I've gotten. I mean, I'm not a salesman, but I've used my big Agner stuff for a number of years on trips where, you know, I'm packing a lot because it's a one-night thing, so the stuff gets scattered a lot, and it's been great. I have no issues whatsoever with it. No leaks. I've been in the rainstorms with that stuff, and it's waterproof. Some of the bags I like. Arkell is a company out of Canada. They make some great waterproof bags that I'm really happy with. I've used for a long time.
because a lot of people claim waterproof, but
yeah, Arkell is. I mean, big Agners have never had an issue.
Totally random. Are you still selling spokes?
No, not. I mean, not. I don't have a spoke cutter anymore.
Okay.
So
No problem.
yeah, I'll go to that.
Yeah, I happen to have a broken spoke, and I was
Oh,
like, well, I'm
no.
coming to this anyway. I figured I'd check. Thanks.
Yeah, good seeing you again.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up?
It's time, right? What's that? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's any questions, just let us know. I mean, this is what we do for sure. So.
Yeah, I'll definitely be calling back about rentals. I'm just always like interested in trying to hear a proper trip. So
Cool. Absolutely. Yeah. There was we went through a ton of stuff last year. There's just a lot of folks that just want to try it before they they don't want to buy a touring bike and not use it, or just the idea of trying these things out before and getting some use. So absolutely, that'd be great.
cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Colin again.
Yeah. No. I definitely met you.
Yeah.
From Bay Ridge, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm very interested in doing a quote with you guys.
Yeah.
Let's
do it.
Yeah, I would love to. I don't know if you guys are doing
Thank you
sign-up.
so
Hey, good seeing you
much.
again. Yeah.
Appreciate
Thanks, guys.
it.
Thanks for coming
Yeah,
in.
hopefully see you
Hey,
this
good seeing you
summer.
again too. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. That'd be great.
Yeah.
See you this summer.
Thank you.
So I don't know if it's a little early to give you the information or.
To sign up?
Yeah.
I'll sign up online.
All
It's
right, cool.
Yeah, we've had, I think this is about 40
No,
people.
the bar
signed up.
Alrighty.
It's a big
the
one.
bar
Yeah, that,
sisters are not me.
that's a big
Nice.
one, and that's the
Nice.
easiest trip.
Yeah.
It's the funnest trip. It's just for a lot of reasons, it's a really good way to get started in
Sure.
it, for sure. So yeah, definitely sign up, because I might end up closing it within about a week, because there's a point where it's just too much.
Yeah, I
There's
know,
too many
absolutely.
people, so.
All right, hit up online for sure.
Yeah, and if it turns out that you don't want to do it or you can't, we'll refund you. It's not like it's you're stuck.
No, definitely. All right, great, cool. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.